We use multiple languages on a regular basis. Chances are very high that at some point, some of the languages we have learned along the way shift a little bit into the background. We can feel disoriented when we don't find a word or seem to have forgotten how to say things. Hi, I'm Ute and I'm a language consultant and intercultural communication trainer, and I help people maintain their languages across their lifespan and add new ones in an effective way. Now, how can we make sure that we can retrieve our languages, actively use them if necessary? Let me just say that it is very common for multilinguals that one or several of our languages shift into the background, even if we once used them up to a very high level of proficiency. In fact, achieving a high level of proficiency is not a guarantee for a lifelong use of that language. If we don't use our languages for a longer period of time or only use them in one domain instead of a variety of domains, we notice a change. I mentioned that words or sentences don't come as naturally as before. We need to make more effort to access the language in the way we once did. Any kind of change in our life can trigger this shift. Now, for example, I use Italian in private settings with friends and family, and also at work, where I would read and write complex texts and scientific texts. And then, for a change in my life, an international move, I had to use English on a daily basis in all sectors of life and up to a high level of proficiency. I then also learned Dutch, as it is the local language where I currently live, and Italian isn't used as much as before. Now, the principle of use it or lose it comes to mind, right? But we don't really lose all of our previous languages unless we suffer from a kind of amnesia or consciously suppress and avoid the other language for a longer period of time. So let's talk about you. What languages do you use daily or weekly? Where, in what context, and with whom? In formal settings or informal settings? Do you also read and write them? Please let me know in the comments. Now, as you might know, I personally use 2 to 4 languages on a daily basis. Throughout the years, there were several shifts in language use, but I made it one of my goals to keep them all alive and to somehow juggle them on a regular basis to make sure I can retrieve them when needed. For example, when I teach them or I want to use them with my friends, my family, or my clients. I mentioned that I help people maintain their languages whilst living abroad and whilst actually learning new ones. And this means also to assess which languages we want or have to foster a little bit more at some stage of our life, and which ones we can keep in the background without doing any harm. So if you want to shift a language that has been in the background for a while into the foreground, there are several ways to do so. First, now make the conscious decision to invest time and energy into it. This means not only on paper or making a plan or telling people about it, but actually by making it happen. An easy way to do this or to start this is to switch something we usually watch or work into the target language. For example, watching or reading the news. You can start with once a week and then increase the time up to daily or every 2 days or so. Choose something that is compelling, motivating for you, and make sure you understand the topic in order to also easier memorize the vocabulary and keep it active, retrievable if needed. Now, whilst listening or even reading, try to repeat sentences out loud. This way you hear yourself in the language. You can try out new sentences and terms. If you are hearing impaired or deaf, you can still do the same. Just try to repeat the words in a way that helps you to remember them. Now, don't worry. Whilst pushing one language to the foreground, the others don't necessarily get pushed back. There are ways to keep them all in the foreground. Think about it not like something static, but something that moves, that rotates. What I do is to, in fact, rotate my languages. So I watch news one day in one additional language, let's say language green, and the next day in the language purple, and so forth. So for me, it looks like this. Each day I watch and listen to something in German, English and Dutch because those are the languages I use daily. As for Italian and French, I alternate. Mondays I foster French, also with my clients and students, and Wednesdays the same. I also listen and read mostly and use more Italian. And the remaining days I use the additional languages, just which one comes first. So for my Swiss German or Spanish or a little bit of Korean or Norwegian and Swedish that I dabbed into a little bit, I foster them every now and then. For example, in the weekend, following the fun principle. If there is, I don't know, a series on Netflix or a podcast that I like, then I really dive into it. Or if there is an event in one of the languages or I meet a friend who speaks that language, I make sure to use it. This way, I cover all my most important languages throughout the week. But this is just me. Please do what works best for you and set actionable steps for your languages. Now the second tip. I'm sure you heard or read about this already. You can set your GPS, computer, cell phone, anything you use in the target language. Here again, I tend to have a rotation system. 1 week or month it is in French, then it's in Italian, then German, Dutch, English, etc. And I often have each device set up in another language. This way my car speaks with me in Dutch, my cell phone in Italian, my computer in German, my tablet in English, and so forth. If it seems too much for you, choose one language per week or month on all your devices. Now, the next tip involves music. Who doesn't like music or who doesn't like to sing songs? But let's start with listening to songs in your target language. You can make a multilingual list of songs on Spotify or wherever you have the list and sing along to the songs as often as you want. I do so when I'm cooking, when I'm doing admin or web design work for my business, or when I'm driving. My children know this very well. If you are hearing impaired or deaf, choose maybe videos with a good quality of pictures where you can lip read the singer or use the transcript. I know that the YouTube transcript is not always ideal, but I'm sure you know some tools that can help you. Now, my fourth tip is about thinking in the target language. During these immersion moments I just mentioned, we can also switch our thoughts, those that usually just flow and are pretty quick paced, into the target language as well. Maybe you have noticed this yourself, but when we shift our thoughts to a language we haven't thought in for a while, the switch slows down the pace, obviously, and that can feel weird at first, even uncomfortable. Now, retrieving the correct words and terms and the syntax structure feels like taking ages. Sometimes it feels like being on a treasure hunt. In fact, we have to silence or suppress the other languages so that they don't surface and jump in all the time. Now, but after a while, it can be minutes, hours, even days, we will get used to thinking in that language again. Now, my fifth tip is closely related to this one, and it is about switching our inner speech into the target language. In what language do you speak with yourself? Now, although we acquire language in social interactions and at some point we internalize it in the course of development, first morphing into a private speech, which is still audible but no longer other directed, and finally turning into an inaudible inner speech. I share a link to an article about inner speech and thought in the description to make sure that we are on the same page. Now, I know that people who regularly switch between languages also do this switch when they talk to themselves. What I invite you to do is to be aware of the languages of your inner speech. Try to shift and talk to yourself in the language that you want to foster. It really helps to feel that language again. I personally intentionally force myself to engage in inner speech when I prepare for a talk, for example, or a webinar or video like this, but also when I write a text in the target language. Once you have done all the above, or whilst you do them, try also to talk in that language whenever possible with other people. The best would be clearly to use it with someone who speaks that language, but that is sometimes difficult when we live abroad. But there are online options of language cafes that can be very helpful. You can also do it when you are alone at home in the car, like I mentioned before. We made a video about talking out loud at activities for multilingual families. You can find the link in the description. Now, when I start talking to myself in my head, but also out loud, I notice that I also change my gestures. Do you observe the same? This can be another tip because, there are so many ways that we can reactivate or keep languages alive or push them into the foreground. And sometimes it's not just the words, but it's really the whole body language, gestures, and thoughts that come into play. So the main thing is, I think, when we really enjoy our languages, we will be able to make them shift into the foreground. Now let me know what tip you are going to apply and if you think these tips are actually helpful for you. How do you keep your different languages alive? How do you push them into the foreground or keep them somehow juggling them on a daily basis? If you need help with finding your very own way to maintain your languages and have fun with improving them, let me know. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next video. Tot de volgende keer. Alla prossima. Bis zum nächsten Mal. A la prochaine. Hasta la próxima.